now.
No foul language.
Okay, and we should start to see attendees trickling in.
And that would be an inside joke for Robin and I. No foul.
Well, computer people are known for that.
So are librarians.
Oh, really?
Surprise.
Well, you know, there are parts of code that you're never supposed to reach. And, you know, occasionally there are bugs. And so
yes,
sometimes coders can't be relied upon to keep it clean in the parts that are, you know, under wraps.
Cool. All right, when they're starting to trickle in, Robin.
Yes, we're
Cool.
at 57. We had 540 something register. So
I think this is my biggest audience ever.
I think it's
we hope to make that happen for you, Monica.
Yeah, we'll see how the attrition shakes out. It's always really interesting.
Well, I mean, I can point to the numbers for every workshop I taught in the last since the pandemic, how many people really showed.
Yeah.
But we can share that the recording will go out to everyone who's registered, and we have told people if they can't make it to at least register to get the link, so it will get out there.
Of course. And that is a great thing to do when you can't attend something. Sign up and watch it later.
I'll just give it one more minute, then at 12, I'll go to 12:01 if that's okay with you, Robin, because the numbers are climbing. All right. I think we're going to get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Advancing Authorship webinar, Avoiding Predatory Journals. How do we support researchers in identifying trusted journals and publishers for their research? That's the big question. And today's speakers are going to help answer this question. We have Monica Berger, Associate Professor from the New York City of College of Technology, CUNY, and she'll be sharing a librarian's perspective on questionable journals and publishers. Monica has 2 forthcoming publications on this topic, to include a chapter on the role of librarians in mitigating predatory publishing by promoting scholarly information literacy, and an ARCL Publications and Librarianship book on predatory publishing. We also have Dr. Jacob Glass and Kevin Nicholas from Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, whose collaboration led to the development of a tool to help identify potential predatory journal solicitations. Their presentation will include a demo, and I'm quite excited about seeing that. Our last speaker, John Seguin from Third Iron, will be sharing his ideas on how to identify and avoid dubious publishers and handle predatory journal solicitations. I'm going to be sharing in the chat link an announcement which features a more detailed bio of all our wonderful speakers. At this moment, too, I would like to remind all attendees not to wait to send your questions. Please use the Zoom Q&A feature to submit your questions. And our wonderful Robin O'Hanlon, our Associate Librarian for User Services, will be moderating the Q&A speaker discussion after the presentation. So we really appreciate getting some questions from you. Finally, we'll be sending out a survey link after the session, and would appreciate if you could take a moment to provide your feedback. So we're going to get started with our first presentation. Welcome, Monica. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. You're all set, Monica.
Okay. Slideshow. Okay, good. Everyone can hear me and see my slide deck, right?
Yes.
Great. So I'll start off with telling you a little bit more about myself. Been exploring predatory publishing for 10 years, and in addition to several journal articles and book chapters, I have this scholarly monograph on the topic that will be published by the Association of College and Research Libraries. And it is sitting in the publisher's Dropbox folder, but moving towards copy editing. So I hope that will happen over the summer and will come out towards either the end of the year or early next year. So I am a faculty librarian at the City University of New York, and that means that I have to publish as well as assess others. And although I chiefly teach undergraduates basic library and research skills, my passion is supporting open access, and even more so, helping my colleagues at my college publish well. Before I start my talk, I want to give a huge shout out to all the medical librarians in the audience and to MSK Libraries, Robin O'Hanlon and Donna Gibson. Thank you for inviting me. And those of you who aren't librarians, please remember that librarians can help you with really important aspects of evaluating publishers. Lastly, as someone who is not in the medical field, I totally get it that when shoddy medical research is published in predatory journals, patients can be harmed. So to start off, as like an icebreaker and a fun thing to do, I'm going to do some Mythbusters, and I want the audience to respond in the chat. So the first question is, any journal that charges a fee to publish in is predatory. Is that true or false? Please write into the chat. Well, I think you guys all got it. Yes, it's false. So in 2023, I imagine almost all of you are familiar with the whole concept of author pays open access, or the use of article processing charges for immediate open access upon publication as like a normative thing. But in case you're not, many prestigious publishers for quite a while, whether they're traditional commercial publishers or newer ones like Biomed Central, are charging fees and have very high quality. But I do want to also address this whole thing that there are many open access journals that do not charge fees. In fact, the vast majority of journals are free to authors, and that research is done by Heather Morrison at the University of Ottawa. Okay, so next question. All open access journals are predatory, true or false? Okay, so to advance that, yeah, it's another falsehood. But here's something to think about. Although most predatory journals exploit open access to justify author fees, relatively few open access articles are from predatory journals. And nailing down the numbers of like how many predatory journals there are and open access journals and all journals, it is incredibly difficult. But we know there are many predatory journals that are just singleton, standalone, like one journal only, or empty journals, just like a husk where the publisher hopes somebody might submit to and they don't have content. So that really complicates trying to get a grip on the numbers. Okay, next question. All predatory journals are open access, true or false? Okay, so one person actually got it more accurately. Gwen said generally true, and that is correct. So this was kind of a trick question. You know, it's complicated, right? Most predatory journals say they're open access, but they require often, not always, but often require authors to transfer copyright to the publisher, which is antithetical to open access, where the author owns copyright. I've also seen, you know, probable predatory journals and publishers that also incorporate subscription models. So those do exist. So Rebecca says, depending exactly on what you're counting as predatory. Well, of course, and that is, of course, the $50 question. Okay, so let's go on. Only low quality journals suffer from cases of research misconduct. True or false? Yeah, most of you seem to have that right. So somebody asked, what is misconduct? Wow, that could be like its own webinar. Talking about things like image manipulation or gift authorship, you know, it's a whole thing. It's very interesting. If you're not familiar with it, please read about it. It's fascinating. So as that's a falsehood, as anyone who's familiar with Retraction Watch knows, research misconduct tends to occur often at prestigious traditional publishers. And, you know, since many of you are medical librarians or doctors, you probably all know the Wakefield article was published in Lancet, which is a very prestigious journal before it was eventually retracted. Okay. So there is the slide about Retraction Watch. So here's some other ones. So I just want to mention that Predatory publishing is often thought of as a problem chiefly for less developed countries in the global south, but authors from the north certainly publish in predatory journals too. And this Moher study is only looking at biomedical, but what was striking was that they found authors from Harvard and from very top-notch medical research institutions. Okay, citation. So I've often read predatory publishing is polluting science. So this is complicated, but a recent article by Bo-Christer Bjork basically found that for the most part, predatory journal articles are not cited very much. And, I do trust Bjork's research. Next, predatory journals never do peer review. Maybe way back in the beginning they didn't, but research has consistently shown, and even personal experience, like anecdote for myself, that the peer reviewers tend to be authors from within the journal or of other journals from the same publisher. And that's also true for editors. And I would really recommend reading research by Severin and Sprinsel. They and the other members of the other co-authors here too, but they did some really interesting research on predatory. So, okay, so here's the overview of the topic. I'll go over predatory publishing's definition and its characteristics. I'll then very briefly discuss predatory conferences. Next, I'll address the audience's authors and share a few tips about picking journals. And I'll conclude with the main takeaways from my forthcoming book. So in April 2019, Dr. David Mower, a well-known epidemiologist, and colleagues invited a very diverse and international group of stakeholders to Ottawa for a 2-day summit devoted to defining predatory publishing, and I was a part of that. We used Delphi polling as part of our process in order to reach consensus. So I'm going to read the Ottawa consensus definition because I still think it's very useful. Predatory journals and publishers are entities that prioritize self-interest at the expense of scholarship and are characterized by false or misleading information. So as an example of misleading information, a publisher may state they follow guidelines from an organization, but they're not actually members of that organization. Deviation from best editorial and publication practices, a lack of transparency. And an example would be obscuring the publisher's ownership or, kind of secretive name changes. And then lastly, or the use of aggressive and indiscriminate solicitation practices. And that references the spam we all receive in our inboxes. So there's a lot of back and forth about what to call itch, but we went with the existing language just for practical reasons. And we recognized that we could not address peer review because peer review is conducted in a black box. And even just judging quality can be extremely subjective. So to summarize, in creating the definition, we did our best to communicate the ambiguity of predatory publishing without being overly vague. One key outcome of the summit was the article in Nature. And if you've not read it, please do. But it's not clear the definition has been universally accepted. Certainly, many scientists have taken it up, but there's a broader resistance to the whole notion of predatory publishing. Many of my fellow academic librarians and others argue that predatory publishing, just as a concept, is a non-starter. And often they're particularly concerned about this whole binary good, bad conceptualization. And then there's Beale, and many folks are not fans of Beale, and I won't get into that. And the terminology in the language is fraught. There are many concerns about terms like blacklists, which are negative lists, as being racist and overly simplistic and so on. A big part of the problem is that, and this is really how I grapple with it, is that it's really tough to draw a clear line between predatory and non-predatory all the time. Sometimes it's just not apparent. There's ambiguity. And that's where I am concerned that lists, particularly blacklists, are problematic. They save time, but they shortcut critical thinking. They can be flawed. Journals can go increase and decrease in quality. And I want to state that I've not used Cabell's product, but I respect that they do use a very sophisticated rubric to score journals. And I'm very disappointed that's not freely available. When they start working on it, they did initially promise they would share it with everyone, but now it's only available to institutions that have the resources to pay for it. So as to language, I also like the term questionable publishing because, again, it moves us away from the good-bad dichotomy and some of the really negativity, almost toxicity surrounding the topic. And again, quality is contextual. It depends. It can be thought of as being on a continuum. Remember, there are many weak and mediocre journals from traditional publishers. Lastly, although there's a significant coincidence of the amateurish with the deceptive, resulting in an untrustworthy experience, there are many startup journals, particularly those from lower income countries, that may be deemed predatory when what is really needed is training and resourcing. But we're here to learn about predatory journals, how to avoid them, and even what can be done to mitigate them. We know that there are concerning publishers out there and they're not going away. So now I'm going to talk a bit about characteristics. So positive and negative heuristics or mental shortcuts are often used to save time, right? And many have used them to judge journals, but looking at just these characteristics can't substitute for close examination of behavior and practice of predatory journals. So I recommend to everyone, when you can, carefully examine potentially predatory publishers, either on your own or if you are not a librarian with your librarian at your institution. Predatory journal characteristics are incredibly helpful to know, but I don't know, I feel like it's not necessarily the best thing to use them diagnostically. And it's really better to actually scrutinize the journal and read some articles and talk to people who are experts, particularly those who are really successful authors in your area. So here, I'm going to start going through characteristics. Here's some classic characteristics. They're all evergreen. The use of unsolicited emails, spam, right? Promises of rapid publication, poor dissemination, and inadequate peer review. So articles in predatory journals largely languish in obscurity because they're not indexed. I also want to comment, as I touched on during the Mythbusters section, Most or all predatory publishers do provide peer review, but it's conducted by their own authors and, we presume not especially rigorous. Pointing back to the Ottawa definition, the use of copycat names persists, meaning that the predatory journal switches up the title of a well-regarded journal. And a lack of transparency is also super common. For example, author fees may change or be disclosed after acceptance. And here is, an example of copycatism. And I think I found this because someone at my college published in the Springer Journal, and I wanted to check their, get data from the journal. And here you see SCIRP, which is commonly thought of as a low quality, if not predatory publisher, has a journal with the same beginning, right? So you can see how easy it is to confuse an author, by taking the first part of the name or flipping part of it. So false and misleading information. So these are also evergreen. Predatory journals frequently appropriate the names of scholars and researchers without their consent, and saying that they're editors or somehow involved with the journal. And they also, without evidence, will claim to be a leading journal. They make false claims about being members of vetted editorial organizations, and they may claim inclusion in trusted whitelists like the Directory of Open Access Journals, or DOAJ. That's very important to the whole discussion. If the journal is very new, just like getting a journal impact factor, there's always some waiting period before applying for inclusion in DOAJ. Lastly, predatory publishers are also deceptive about claiming to have a journal impact factor, or they use these bogus, fabricated, individually or actual predatory impact factors. And there are companies that supply these. So here's an example of that, the British Journal of Medical and Health Research. So they have a copycat name, right? They're trying to confuse with that name. And they highlight speed to publication. Obviously this is probably, I think, from a spam I got. But I want to point out the phometric, an IBI factor. And this comes from some company that does do phometrics. There are many of them. So deviation from best editorial practices. So most of these are also evergreen, but poor editorial processes for both content and the publisher's site. When you look at a spam message or a publisher's site and you start to see grammatical and punctuation errors, I think that should be telling. It's a publisher. They should not have these, right? Okay, now I'm going to talk a little bit about spam. So to make it a little more fun for everyone, I would like everyone in the audience to please use the chat to point out signals of a potential predatory publisher in this message. Good. The fast pub time is a screamer, right? I think everyone's getting that. Someone mentioned Gmail. We also have a Hotmail address. Oh, the Alexa Hunter is sending from Hotmail, which I think is pretty cute. Yeah, unprofessional appearance, that highlighting really amused me. Yep, typographical errors and spacing, what I just mentioned. Yeah, Charles mentions, hi Charles, remember we used to work together, non-membership in OASPA. Yep, I mean, but I'll talk about that later. What else? No, I think, you got them all except for one thing, I think, and apologies if you missed it. Let me see. You got them all. This is like Pokemon, right? Very broad scope, very, very, very broad scope. And let me go back a slide, couple slides. So, and I checked out the publisher, just for fun, that's what you got to do. And their name is the American Research and Publication Center, which, and their website is loaded with this really amateurish stock photography and clip art and whatever, which is typical. And their name sounds predatory to me. And I was like, okay, I'm going to check out the editorial board of this journal. And I immediately found someone who they listed as an editor. She had an up-to-date CV and she wasn't listing it. So what did they do? In order to make it harder for people to find themselves on the editorial boards of these journals, they mess around with the name of the institution or the person, right? They do these little things so that way your vanity Google search doesn't bring it up. So the woman, the psychologist who I checked out, is listed at the University of FIU. I quickly was like, oh, that's got to be Florida International University. It was. And that way, she doesn't know she's listed on this. I'm sorry, I'm laughing. It's just so clever. Next, I want to just point out that when you publish, you will receive these customized solicitation messages. And, I thought even the fact that they included an excerpt from my research was really trying to stroke my vanity. I thought it was pretty funny. Always ask, who is this publisher? Are they part of a known entity? And this is like a schema I came up with, right? So for me, it's easy to think like for-profit versus not-for-profit. But again, you have to kind of trace the publisher back to, a known commercial company, a corporation, a scholarly society, an organizational, professional organization, or a university, whether it's a tiny little scholar-led journal or not. Librarians certainly know, think, check, submit. They played a big role in developing it. This is really useful to authors to think through the questions you need to ask yourself. I think it's the best tool out there and not super time consuming. It works with all disciplines. I highly recommend it. And then I thought it would be cool because this was like a biomedical audience. At my college, there are lots of faculty who, are in that, doing research in that area. And my colleague published in this journal. I was like, who is this journal? I have never heard of it. So it turned out to be a smaller, independent Canadian biomedical publisher. And I've actually even heard of the person behind it because he blogs a lot about open access. And what did I do? So I went and quickly looked it up in DOHA, and then I saw, oh, they've been in DOHA forever. I do really trust them. They're not perfect, but I really trust Directory of Open Access Journals as a tool. So case closed. But I want to point out again, and maybe this is obvious to many in the audience, the registered icon tells us that the research was pre-registered, right? The Mower team found that biomedical predatory journals overwhelmingly do not comply with research protocols, including the most basic of all, IRB. Predatory conferences, I'll talk about very briefly. Again, the turnaround time is really the loudest thing. And my impression, and I mean, I can't say I can easily point to research, is that like there's even lower vetting, like anything will be accepted. And I've observed tying publication fees into the conference fees, so that way it's more lucrative. I also think they're a little harder sometimes to distinguish from journal solicitations. So as always, just look at who's behind the conference. And I just want to point out that Omics is the largest predatory publisher in the world. They have a conference series too. So it's good money for the larger predatory publishers. Think Check Attend is a similar tool to Think Check Submit. And next I'm going to get into being an author and publishing more broadly. So, you know, I talked about the negative. Now I'm going to talk more about like what you should avoid. Now I'll talk more about like what you should or can do. So what if you're a newbie, like a new author, you haven't really published much? Here's some suggestions. Using your literature review to further dig into who's important in your research area and where they publish. Use library databases for your lit review. You know, it's a little murky how many predatory journals do show up on Google Scholar, but I would say if you use a library database, you're not going to have to worry about it too much. On the other hand, Google Scholar alerts are awesome for getting updates on your research topic. And I imagine many of you know this. And try to have a couple of target journals in mind when you are writing. And I recommend these strategies, you know, certainly at any kind of institution. So before submitting, I would say, you know, all authors should not be shy or reticent about asking around. I mean, you have to do some due diligence if you don't know the journal. So I would say, and especially to the medical folks in the audience, please slow down. Don't outsource placing your research article with a junior member of your research team. Always check who's on the editorial board and who's published in the journal. And, you know, and again, if it's at all possibly a predatory journal, you know, cross-check that editorial board. But generally, it's really helpful to publish in a journal where you're familiar with the folks behind it, right? Name recognition matters. You can also learn a lot about a journal based on where it's indexed, and your librarian can help you, especially with questions around bibliometrics, things like journal rankings and other, you know, bibliometric scoring, as well as indexing. And it should be noted that although predatory journals have been found in PubMed and PubMed Central, they're almost never on Medline, which is highly selective. But the best advice about content quality is from someone else who's a researcher in your area, who's also a very successful, highly accomplished author. Okay. So before submitting, look at a journal's homepage for these many items. Scope, type of articles, methodologies are especially important to pay attention to. You know, and I've read that the main reason why articles get rejected is because they're out of scope. Think about what you want out of your publication. Do you want a high impact journal? Do you want expedited publication? And there are fine journals out there like, you know, PLOS that have faster publication. Do you want a journal that's highly specialized or one that reaches a broader audience? And, you know, ask about open access. Is it required because of your funding, or is it just something you want so anyone can read your work? Before submitting, do some of this vetting around these organizations. If the journal's open access, make sure it's in DOAJ or a member of the Open Access Scholarly Publishers Association, or OASPA. I always look that up. They function as whitelists. Membership in COPE, the Committee on Publication Ethics, is another important marker. I really recommend knowing them, especially anybody who's an editor. Please check out COPE. They're invaluable. And don't forget to cross-check these by going to the editorial organization's website. And then for this audience, I want to call out these specific medical editorial organizations: WAME, ICMJE, STM, and for nursing, NAME. Don't forget to cross-check for false claims of inclusion, okay? And I should also mention that NAME has a fabulous whitelist, so nurses are particularly vulnerable to publishing in low quality / predatory journals. So I want to just talk a little bit about my book to wrap up my talk. It looks to me like I'm actually still on time. So here are the takeaways from my book most relevant to this audience. Firstly, I think of predatory publishing as a wicked problem. What's a wicked problem? It's a problem that is often either unsolvable or exceedingly difficult to solve. And now I'll use the dictionary definition, can always be described as the symptom of other problems. So accordingly, my chief argument in my book is that predatory publishing is the result of systemic problems in academia, science, and publishing. Chiefly, I'm concerned that an overemphasis on quantity of publishing and a related overheated, hyper-competitive environment resulted in problems related to scholarly assessment and evaluation. Universities and research centers directly compete against each other for grant funding as well as international university rankings. Now, many folks are concerned about these issues independently of any discussion of predatory publishing. There are a series of declarations, starting with the San Francisco Declaration, which is nicknamed DORA, that address this. Reproducibility issues are also super important and should matter to this audience, as well as unethical research and publishing behaviors can be linked to these problems with assessment and the intense pressure that academics and scientists face. Many medical researchers, nurses, and others who are also clinicians and educators face great challenges juggling doing their research and their publishing, their other duties. And I would say it's especially bad in the global South. And they may not be able to write fluently. So talking about the many authors at poorly funded institutions, including especially those in the South, they struggle specifically because they're under-resourced in terms of facilities, time for research, ability to go to conferences, join research teams that are usually based, almost always based in the West, global North, research training, and so on. And they may not be able to write fluently in English, and they don't have money for author fees. And then mainstream journals are less likely to accept their work in general, unless the author is truly stellar. And then all those problems usually are not relevant anyway, because they're stellar, they're a superstar. So some solutions to predatory publishing include the expansion of free-to-author publishing options, particularly for those in the global South, the lower income countries, and more quality publishing in those countries, because many, predatory journals are essentially partially or wholly based in the South, and also providing that training in research methods and publishing to authors in general, but particularly in lower income countries. Open peer review and open science, which would shed light on peer review rigor, advance reproducibility, and mitigate research misconduct, and promotion of critical thinking about publishing or scholarly information literacy. And that's where librarians have a huge, huge role, whether it's through workshops or consultations. And I certainly am a big believer in consultations because they're private, they're focused, I think they're super helpful. So, you know, for the non-librarians in the audience, you know, don't forget that your librarians are there to help you with this kind of thing. So I want to talk a little bit about reform of scholarly assessment. It's happening in Europe, where open access in general is like advancing super rapidly for various reasons. And they're reforming scholarly assessment through the use of narrative and selective CVs. So that way, people are just really highlighting their work that is the most important. Systems of evaluation here in the US are only changing at, I would say, kind of more of a glacial pace, even though there is stuff going on. But I want to end the talk by circling back to Ottawa, to David Mower and the Ottawa team. David Mower was the chief author of the Hong Kong Principles, which focus on research integrity, but link research integrity to the reform of assessment processes, reform of peer review, and the promotion of open science. The Hong Kong Principles really point the way to the systemic changes needed to reform scholarly communications. And education is the other element needed to mitigate predatory publishing. And that is why we're here today. So I want to thank you again to MSK for inviting me, and I hope this talk has advanced your understanding of predatory publishing. Thank you.
Right. Dr. Glass and Kevin, take it away.
All right. Thank you. All right. Can everybody see my screen? Okay, great. All right, so Jacob and I are going to be talking today about a tool that we developed called, it has a few different names, but one of the things we've landed on recently is Predatory Journal Detector. So I'll hand it over to Jacob to talk about where this sort of project idea came from.
So we're really so thrilled to be speaking with on this webinar and to be invited to join with all of you guys, especially over the past couple of weeks interacting with the library team over here at MSK and having a chance to discuss some of these considerations with Monica. You know, it's a real expert in ways that we aren't. And so the background to this project, as you might expect, happened when I, as a sort of budding physician scientist, published an article together with my clinical mentors, Dan Dewar and Martin Tallman. And the two of them kindly assigned me the position of I guess, first author and corresponding author. And this was the first time I'd been a corresponding author on an article. And as you might notice from the title, this is a little bit of a niche topic. We had actually, Dr. Dewar had noticed that in his extensive experience treating people with acute promyelocytic leukemia, as this particular agent, arsenic trioxide, as many people know as arsenic, actually had come into the regimen that's used to treat this disease, allowing people to treat people with APL with a chemotherapy-free regimen. And the striking thing was that despite the fact that this was chemotherapy-free, and despite the fact that people were having cure rates that are better than any other type of acute myeloid leukemia, certainly, people were having surprising numbers of herpes zoster reactivation events, herpes zoster being the causative agent for chickenpox. So this was a bit of a surprise. And so we went back and looked at the data and found, yes, indeed, arsenic is associated with an increased risk of this. And so we made some recommendations about how people could give prophylactic antivirals in the context of this therapy. And so you can see, this was submitted and accepted and available online in March of 2021. And shortly thereafter, I began getting all of these requests for speeches at conferences, editing journals. Some of these were, pretty obviously bogus, but a couple of them, as Monica suggested, I reached out to my sort of research mentors and faculty members who were sort of in the service, and said, well, are these legitimate? Should I be considering these? Should I be replying? And the answer invariably was, I've never heard of it. So this brings up the this dynamic here, where sometimes it's one of these, it when you see it sort of events. You can list all of the items that seem odd. They spelled your name wrong. The sentence structure isn't right. There are misspellings. There are, spacing differences. There are odd highlightings. The tone is overly enthusiastic, as Kevin will say, or just frankly unprofessional. But sometimes, and probably we're going to see this more with large language models, ChatGPT, where the access to, highly polished language is much easier to come by. It sounds professional. The journal sounds reasonable. Maybe it wasn't in something you or your colleagues have published in, but it sounds like something appropriate. And the thing that really got me was that people started giving me these personal follow-up emails saying, hey, I emailed you a month ago. I don't want to bother you, but we would really love it if you would agree to be a guest editor or submit your article or join this conference. And so, as a junior faculty member, obviously you're, especially in the biomedical sciences, your career is dependent on publishing and being involved and having sort of a global footprint. If you can find an audience and find an area you can really significantly contribute to. And when your mentors are able to tell you, yes, this is predatory, no, this is not, that's very easy. But when the answer is, I don't know, haven't heard of it, and you get these personalized emails, you sort of search for other sources of information. And so that's when actually Isaac Wagner in the department we, I guess, formerly called Strategy and Innovation, now it's been renamed, but connected me with Kevin, and we set about to create an automated resource that can basically provide you with the tools to make a more informed decision. And obviously with anything that's tool or data driven, we wanted to have something where you can click a button and get an answer. But as researchers and people who are sensitive to the idea that not everything is black and white, we also wanted to provide people with the tools they would need to say, is this determination reasonable? If I wanted to know more, what can I do with it? And then, there's another undercurrent here, which is that, we're at an academic institution and we love this idea that people can gather data, can analyze data. We're going to be scratching the surface here and providing people with recommendations, but we would love to see other people take this and bring it to the next level, apply it to their area of expertise, do something that we didn't even think about. And so I'm going to hand it over to Kevin to tell you how we got started on this project and where we'd like to go with it.
Sure. Thank you, Jacob. And thank you again, Donna and Robin, for inviting us today. So when Jacob and I started talking about this and we started trying to sketch out what a tool would look like, the very first thing that we sort of landed on is just the obvious sources that we could leverage would be the things that Donna had brought up, the many sources of data around that have information about which sources might be legitimate and their levels of legitimacy and how long they've been around, and providing that additional context for the user. So really the main thing, and what we're going to demo today is what you'll see is the front end application, but you can almost think of this as two major components. The first component is really just going to all these various data sources, PubMed, DOAJ, COPE, you name it, Caltech predatory conferences, taking all that data from those sources, which is not necessarily easily extractable in its current form. Sometimes it's there, sometimes they'll put it, conveniently on a CSV file, but other times, it may just be sort of in the website, and it's not something that's something that you can easily just go to and get. Maybe it requires some sort of level of coding to extract it from an API endpoint. Maybe you need to just scrape it directly from the website. So part of the thing that we think that we're bringing to the table here is we're providing one centralized location where we have taken all the data from these various sources, not all of them, but a lot of them, we're still working on it, and put them into one single source. And then from there, so basically these data sources go into this back end analytic pipeline. A fancy term for this is ETL, extract, transform, load. It's just a technical term for taking data from somewhere else, making some transformations to it as necessary, and putting it in another place. And so that's what we're essentially doing. And so the thing that we think are the benefits of this is that, hey, as I was describing before, there's many, many sources of truth out there. It's not just, there's just PubMed and there's just DOAJ. No, there's PubMed, DOAJ, and all of those other sources that Monica mentioned. And so they're very diverse, and it's complex in terms of how you might get the data from them. And so they're also changing constantly, right? So since we've started running this ETL, I see new journals being added to PubMed every single day. It's anywhere from 10 to 50 being added in a single day. So the other benefit of this ETL is it's running every single day to update. So you don't have to worry about the list, the CSV file that you got 2 months ago is now out of date and doesn't have the latest changes. So there's all those benefits. And the other thing is that ultimately this data will go out to a front end that you see on the right-hand side. And the main benefit that we think this provides, and this is what Jacob was talking about, is really just providing the user with some context so that they really can make their own decision. We do, in the bottom right, also offer some sort of overall judgment call based on a really simple rules-based algorithm. However, I don't feel like that's the main thing to focus on with our particular tool. The nice thing about it is it's going to let you know for every one of the sources that the tool hits, what were the results? Did it match this one? Did it match that one? Did it find a match in PubMed, et cetera, et cetera? And so the thing that we think that this is helpful mostly is providing that additional context for the user and let the user make their own decision as to whether they want to proceed with that particular journal entity or conference entity. On the left-hand side here, we have all the data sources that we've already included. So these data sources are being updated in our ETL on a daily basis. We're hitting every single one of them and gathering all the data. So that includes PubMed, includes Clarivate, journal citation reports, DOAJ, et cetera, et cetera. On the top right is sort of our wish list of additional sources. Monica mentioned, I think, all of these. In the bottom right, there's two interesting ones I'll briefly mention. One was agencia data, which is, if folks aren't familiar with this is travel data. So we used internal MSK employee data that was de-identified just to see where folks had traveled for conferences. And so we could say, oh, okay, well, there's no guarantee that just because somebody traveled to a conference that it was definitely legitimate, but it's again goes into that theme of helpful context. At least one of my colleagues has gone to this conference in the past. Another thing that we use, and this is really not at all strictly within the realm of predatory versus legitimate sources, is Hugging Face, which is an open source AI model that focuses specifically on natural language processing models. And so we can use a model like that right out of the box and use it to do some spam detection. In earlier versions of our tool, they're not currently using either one of these, but we've already used it in development versions of this tool. This is just going over the high level of what the rules-based algorithm does to deliver a high-end verdict. I don't want to spend too much time on this because, again, we don't think the overall label is the thing that is really should be the primary focus for the particular, for the tool, really the context around it. But, you know, there are several things that we noticed were just obvious red flags. One really nice thing is if there's an ISSN that's cited in an email that you receive, and that ISSN doesn't show up anywhere in PubMed, that's just an automatic red flag from everything that we've seen. So just imagine that PubMed may have some predatory journals that have infiltrated it, but it should be the largest data source in terms of the total list of potential journals. And if it doesn't have that ISSN, in all likelihood, it's probably predatory, but again, might be up for debate. All right, so next steps for us is figuring out where best to deploy this, whether it's continuing to deploy it internally within MSK or making it public or both. Determining how best to deploy a tool like this. Currently, we have it, and I'll demo it shortly, as a front-end application where the user puts the information from the email there and then runs it. But maybe it would work better if the user just took an email, forwarded it to some email address, and then within a few minutes they get back a reply that gives them a full report. Maybe that would be a better system. Or maybe some sort of API endpoint that anybody could hit. Again, questions about how it will be maintained. This all ties into where best to deploy, whether it's open source or some sort of hybrid model continues to be here at MSK. And then the next 2 points go into the idea of maybe a supplementary NLP model. You know, if we built a NLP model that might help bridge the gap when the current data sources don't have information on a particular publication. Maybe it's one that was just, you know, it was just invented yesterday by somebody in some other part of the world. You know, the NLP model might help bridge the gap when the data sources haven't yet caught up to the latest publications out there. And then the last part is, and this thing I think is interesting, is now that we've had this ETL process that's gathering data sources from a bunch of different places where it's hard to extract that data from, you can now start to answer potential research questions. You know, to Monica's point in Mythbusters 2, there was, you know, trying to nail down the numbers. What is the actual proportion of ones that are actually legitimate or actually appear as legitimate in DOAJ or whatever the case is that you want to check? You can actually start to answer those types of research questions. So rather than saying, you know, we know that from checking a few, you could say, well, now we can say what the full universe is potentially. And that opens all types of doors to, like, you know, potential research questions, you know, and potential opportunities of things, you know, other potential tools down the road. So just in the interest of time, I'm going to skip ahead to the tool itself. And so the first email I'm going to show you is an email that Jacob got, and this was just from the leukemia research publication. So this was just really essentially like a thank you email, but also like a reminder, hey, if you have any publications down the road, you know, make sure to contact us. And so I ran this email through the application, and the application is very simple in its design. So this is the main part of the application. It's just the user simply copies in an email address here, they copy in the body of the email, and they click run evaluation. There's another option that's not really like the main thing here, but you could also use a key term search. So maybe you don't have an email that you received, but there's still something you want to check out about that particular publication because you've heard about it. Or in this case, I actually ran one of the ISSNs that Monica mentioned, that email that we saw with the Gmails and the Hotmail addresses. I ran one of those ISSNs through here and it did not have any hits. And so that's again, something that might strongly suggest this is not you know, a genuine, legitimate publication. And then there's also an info tab that has information. So it tells you the last time the ETL was run and where what the data sources are. So when I ran this on the legitimate email that Jacob had received, again, there's going to be some things that it finds. It's basically going to take that email and split it up into various terms and then run matches with this enormous table that has all the data as of today from all these various sources. And what it did find ultimately was it found hits in JCR oncology journals and PubMed. And those were really the two things that ultimately, move this towards potentially legitimate. We still say always still proceed with caution. And then but it would also have all this other information. If the user cared at all, and this, again, it's up to the user, depending on what sort of things that they consider important, they could see whether it had any hits in Beal's list. They could see whether it had any hits in Caltech questionable conferences, but they also see DOAJ, OASPA, JCR, PubMed, et cetera, et cetera. We also do spell check and the search for non-English alphabetic characters being present. And then at the bottom, it just returns the original text of the email and then just highlights within that email which parts were suggest legitimate versus suggest red. So here there were none that suggested predatory, so there's no red highlighted terms in here. And then if I take another email, this is another email, I don't know if this is easy to see, but this is an email that Jacob received in January, and it says, I've emailed you in December regarding the opportunity to publish this year's end issue of myelosuppressive therapy. I'm not even sure of the exact name of this publication, but they're asking for a publication to be sent or a submission. And so what we can do is we can copy that, throw it in the tool up here. We copy the email address, and then we run the evaluation on it. And one nice thing about this is, the data is also split up in, it's sort of the smartest ways we could kind of think of. So rather than focusing on, specific email addresses, we really kind of look for matches on the domain name only, just because of the fact that, to Monica's point, a lot of these places are switching up their usernames constantly so that you can't easily track, it's from this specific email address. And this one came back likely predatory. So it did have a hit, again, if this is of interest or importance to you, it did find a hit in Beal's Publishers. But more importantly, that ISSN that it cited was nowhere to be found in PubMed. So that's really the main thing that, sort of moved this into the likely predatory realm. And then lastly, or actually, you know what, I'll probably just skip over this. The long story short, because I know we're running low on time, this is a conference email that was also predatory. And here, what it focused it on was Piers Alley Media, which is something that always gets flagged in Caltech questionable conferences. And so I'll just, I'll conclude there. Let me just stop sharing my screen. Over to you, John.
All right, sounds great. Thanks everybody for joining today, and thanks for Sloan Kettering for inviting me. Appreciate it very much. I'm going to share some slides here real quick. My name is John Seguin. I'm one of the founders and the president and chief librarian here at Third Iron. I know that this audience that we've got today has a lot of librarians, but maybe some non-librarians. So I was just going to briefly introduce what our product's about. But very much I'm focusing on what we're going to be doing with predatory journal awareness, since that's, of course, the focus for us today. Third Iron is a library technology company. We're used around the world in about 1,500 libraries. We have a very, very kind of loyal base, which is wonderful. And it's great to see the utility of our services year after year after year. We do a lot of things beyond what I'm talking about today that deal with linking, figuring out how to build the most reliable link using an AI expert system from any point of discovery, whether that's from discovery systems, from databases, or from open web searching. We have a variety of tools that help to do that. So we're really focusing on trying to find, when the researcher finds a citation, wherever that may start, how do you get them to the full text in the most reliable way possible? So we're handling this kind of pathway and these kind of pipes between all these different systems. You may be a researcher or a faculty member at an institution that is already using our services, don't even know it. It's completely possible and plausible because we like to operate kind of in the background. Our technologies very organically integrate between all these different systems. It's most commonly seen as a one-click to PDF, but there's lots of other different iterations of this as well. But the points that I'm emphasizing here is talking really about the volume that we're seeing. We have about 15 million plus unique users that have access to our LibKey services, and about 15,000 articles are signposted per minute, all day, every day. And so the point of that message is really about that this is a major conduit and highway for linking data for users. And that's what kind of gets us into talking about this topic and where we intersect with it. Because for the last year and a half or so, we've started to realize that we have an amazing opportunity to be in the pathway of users and to create speed bumps whenever it seems appropriate to do so. And we've done that with the retraction watch data in the last year and a half. So if you're using the LibKey services without having to make any modifications or changes to user behavior, what effectively is happening is that the retraction watch data, which is tracking retractions, is happening automatically when a user tries to get to full text for that item. Because for a lot of the kind of similar reasons that for predatory journals, things are not labeled so clearly, depending on where you're starting, even with things that publishers want you to know about, like retraction. So where you discover something in database X or public website Y, it may not immediately label it as such. And so we want to make sure that users are aware of this editorial status. So when it comes to looking at predatory titles, we wanted to do something very similar. And we looked at a lot of different kind of sources for this, looking at different ways to identify material. It's not something that we wanted to be in the business of doing ourselves. We wanted to look at folks who've been doing this for a long time. And so, you know, similar to, as Monica was noting in her presentation, Cables has been at this for quite a while, and we had a lot of respect for the way that they put their data together. And we also had calls from our mutual customers to say, hey, we're subscribing to the Cables data. It'd be really, really nice if it was built into LibKey so that our users could have that same speed bump kind of experience, just like we're doing with retraction data. Because that's sort of the big conundrum, right? Users are out there using these various services, or they're on the open web, which of course is more likely where you're going to run into things that are predatory versus retraction. How do we get in front of them to let them know that this is there, rather than putting onus on them to understand this entire universe and to know how to go seek that material out? Especially when we're looking beyond faculty, beyond researchers who are, who are looking to publish, and that's a kind of a different kind of workflow. And instead, we're looking for people just looking at data to write a paper or to do a literature review. How do they go about doing that? So we do this in a number of different kind of ways. I'm going to kind of share some screenshots here to kind of show you what this experience feels like. This is how our retraction system works, and you'll see the kind of similarities here that we're building out for predatory material as well. This happens to be the Primo system from Ex Libris, but there's every different system out there is supported by us, and you can see that we're signposting a retracted article notification. Normally, this would say something like download PDF, but we're actually able to rewrite the screen in real time and say, no, actually, this has been retracted. And when you click through that, we automatically repurpose all of the retraction watch data, and including the reasons for retraction, and signpost it immediately, link off to any of the journalistic articles they might have done, and or the official retraction notice. So really trying to bring that information to users, having a lot of links for learning more, trying to educate the undergrads, especially who are not familiar with this terminology even, and make sure that that's part of the workflow that people can see. Normally, if you're familiar with our LibKey products and you're linking through to something, This is just an automatic right to the PDF. So we're not speed bumping you in a normal situation. So this is a very kind of unusual and jarring kind of experience for someone, as it should be. We also have a service we call LibKey Nomad. That's a browser extension used at about 1.5 million users worldwide. And when people have Nomad installed, we're looking on the open web. So we're looking at publisher pages. I have a bunch of other screenshots in just a moment for other places we're doing this. And we're doing that same article retracted there. Now, expressions of concern is related to that. That's something we're also going to be adding here in this fall, kind of going beyond retraction, but it follows a similar theme, right? This idea of that there's an editorial status about this article that you should be aware of. When we get into cables, though, and we talk about predatory materials, we're talking about journal level type of identifiers, right? Not necessarily articles. But the LibKey service operates on both levels. It looks at articles as well as journals. Monica talked a lot about, very rightly, that if you're using library services, library databases, library discovery tools, you're going to largely limit your exposure to a lot of these things, but not 100%. There's still some there, right, that kind of sneak through somehow, some way. I looked at the cables list, which is about 16,000 journals that they've identified as predatory. And looked at the browsing system and the LibKey system, which Third Iron builds, which is largely informed by journals that libraries have in their databases, right? Because we're linking out to things they have access to. These are all journals that on the face of it seem pretty put together, legit ISSNs, legit cross-ref data, they do all the right things. And about 250 of them were noted as having some sort of issue on the cables data set. So much smaller than 15,000, but still something, right? And that's where we want to note those in articles. This was indexed in Summon, for example. There's a lot of chatter in the Q&A and box here about naming of these things, and Monica talked about that. It's a difficult thing to do. We've actually decided to call this a problematic journal rather than predatory. We feel that's a little more balanced, right? But there's the one that Monica suggested equally good, because sometimes there are ones where it's a little bit of a sliding scale, right? Some things have a ton of sort of infractions. They call them violations in cables terminology, where there's lots and lots of circumstantial evidence that points to, yeah, this is probably predatory. And the previous project we just heard about does a similar thing, right? You're looking at different data sources to do that. Cables has a similar methodology. So we identify this as problematic journal. When you click through this, same type of display, right? Where we've got the kind of red kind of warning here, and here's the data from cables. And so here's their access and copyright, there's this website violation, peer review, et cetera, et cetera. But things are, like I say, a sliding scale. Some violations may be one or two that you may look at that yourself and say, actually, I'm not too concerned about this. I know one violation they have, for websites, for example, is if there's no physical address listed, they have just a PO box. And I'm kind of like, well, we're a company that's been around for 12 years and still only have a PO box. So, I think that there's some things that probably have to be taken with a grain of salt as well. But it's the culmination, right, of all these different things to pay attention to. With our Nomad product, when you're on the open web, this is where you're going to see a lot more activity for predatory material, right? Because most of these the publishers who are in this problematic state don't necessarily go through all of the sort of metadata syndication practices that we would expect from more legitimate publishers. It costs money, it costs expertise, right? It takes a lot of effort to do it. But this is where you get those emails, like the very cool tool we just saw, where you're getting invited to different things and so on. And where Cables integrates with LibKey here is that LibKey can do domain analysis. So as you get that email and you go, let me see what's more about this, there's usually some call to action. Go to my website, send us money, submit your credit card, whatever it is. And what they can't do is spoof those domains. And so if those domains are being tracked and you arrive at that, you'll see this kind of pop up here, problematic journal, click through, same type of red screen that appears again, giving you the reasons why Cables believes that this might be a problematic publisher. With the LibKey Nomad product in particular, we have the ability to push this product out using group policy installs, which universities and hospitals have been making great use of, so that it's just on people's computers. So if they're getting these emails and they click through to that call to action, this can just pop up and alert them that something nefarious may be going on, give them that warning, and get in their workflow on a really good level. So all of these different elements, we consider them kind of in a similar category in that they're editorial or journal statuses. And we're treating them in a similar way in terms of our workflow, our UX, and so on. Obviously, they have to different degrees of severity and so on. We're doing the retraction watch and expression of concern data for all of our customers, and the cables will be for the mutual customers of cables. As Monica did note, it is a subscription product. So here's just another very kind of visual sort of analysis of how this feels, right? Use case kind of one, you're a researcher, you go to your library services, you're using your normal library tools. Again, that shields you a lot from most of this stuff, but you may encounter that in the process of doing things in your databases. LibKey is in that workflow, so we're able to display and warn you about this. Another situation, you're going right to a database. You're not going to your discovery tools and so on, but you're going right to a database. And in those situations, the same sort of thing can happen. Different databases have different criteria for what's included and so on. So that can happen there. But again, LibKey is involved with that link resolution, so we can jump into the path there and warn you. Or you're getting those solicitations, which is leading you to an open web. And that's where having Nomad installed can also get you to the same type of alert and let you know that this may be problematic. I included just a couple other screenshots about Nomad, just to show kind of the breadth of where it takes effect. It can be thousands of publisher sites. It can be third-party sites like ResearchGate. And this is another area where this is an incredibly popular site, doesn't have the same sort of editorial control that you're going to expect from library services, but a lot of people are using it, so it can much more frequently appear there. Or out on PubMed, doing an inline integration here, so we're having one-click links to things. If there's something predatory that would appear here, that blue where you see download PDF would have that same problematic journal in bright red. So we're alerting in the same way there, as well as with retractions. And Wikipedia, make sure your sources are right. You know, as you go through there, it's a nice way to make sure that what you're reading is backed up by legitimate sources. This technology has also an open API, as well as an open resolution scheme that we call libkey.io. So it's been integrated into tons of different open web services, library discovery services, and for the medical community, most importantly, systematic review systems. So we're in Pico Portal right now in Hub Meta, and we're in process, varying levels of integration right now with Distiller and Covidence. So I think that should also have a profound impact, especially on doing systematic reviews, because we can also on the API alert people about that. If you'd like to learn a little more about any of these things, certainly drop me an email, john@thirdiron.com. Check out our website. Cables is a really interesting site. They do a lot of other things with journal analysis. So not just the predatory reports, but they have other products as well. They have a new product called medicine.cables.com. And then retractionwatch.com, of course, as well, has a really great, interesting journalistic site, a great Twitter feed as well, if you're on Twitter. So I encourage you to take a look at these various resources. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you, John, and thank you to all of our speakers. We're going to move into the Q&A portion now, because we had very wonderfully so many attendees, over 250 at one point. We're obviously not going to have time to get to all of your questions, but if you have a question that we don't answer and it's a burning question, you can email me. I just put my email in the chat. Please put your questions in the question and answer feature, just so I don't have to scroll through the chat. And thank you to the speakers who've been answering questions so far. I'm going to just kind of pick questions at random now. Sorry to be tyrannical. That's my right, I guess, as Q&A moderator. Oh, and I also just wanted to clarify that the session is being recorded, and everyone who registered will get a copy or a link to the recording. We will talk to all of the presenters if they feel comfortable about sharing their slides. Just quickly, the resources that have been shared. So Kevin and Dr. Glass so many people want to use your product. So I just wanted to clarify, though, that it's currently not available externally. But if you want to talk a little bit more about sort of plans for the future. And Monica, also, everyone wants to know about your book's title, and we know that there's no publication date, but
It doesn't have a title. All I
no
can say
title.
is
All right, so
a very slow boat.
a very slow boat, but pending publication. We'll all be reading it as soon as it comes out. Okay, so I'm gonna start with a question here, and I think this could be answered by anyone, but maybe Monica, if you want to start. What should you do if you have discovered that you have published in what is a predatory journal?
Okay. So you're saying after it's come
Yeah,
out.
I think after the fact.
So, I mean, I read less about it these days, but you could ask that the article be withdrawn, I believe is the correct term, not retracted, just basically removed. But back in the, I guess what I call the Beale days, there was a lot about how these publishers would then turn around and say, well, you have to pay $500 or $1,000 to remove your article. So it gets very sticky, but COPE advises and common sense advises that you have an attorney at your institution, whether it's a college or a hospital. You send them a takedown notice if they ignore you. And I think that's really the best thing to do, because you don't want it on your CV or your Google Scholar profile. I mean, and of course, I would also say it's probably also a good idea to check in with your librarian to make sure this is indeed a predatory journal. And again, I want to say, for convenience, I keep saying a predatory journal, but we know there's ambiguity.
Okay, great. So this was another question for you, Monica. You mentioned editorial board members listed without consent as a sign of a predatory journal. And then how would you know at a glance if these scholars are actually involved with it? And then you mentioned Googling a CV. Are there other sort of signs in terms of these like editorial board members?
Well, when you won't see their email, you will not get their department often. There'll be little errors in like how their name is given, or in the case of this particular one I looked at, because it came in yesterday very freshly, they'll kind of mess around with the name of the institution. Problem is, a lot of people are sloppy about keeping up their CVs, and that makes it more difficult, right? So it's not a perfect method, but sometimes it works, so I don't know if that addresses that. And then I've seen skewed images. I mean, that's kind of gross. I mean, where they obviously like Google searched you and they were so silly they couldn't like get your headshot correct, so you look warped. I mean, there are all kinds of strange things like that. There's also the whole concept of endogeny, where these publishers might share editors across multiple journals because they don't have enough people to go around. So that's a little different from the theft of the editors' names, but it's a similar kind of weirdness.
I think one other thing that I had looked at was whether somebody is whether the activity is within somebody's realm of expertise. Like if you have, somebody who's a physicist commenting on a biology journal, that's a little bit off.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that also goes for request to publish too, solicitations. I'm like, the number of solicitations I've gotten for like agricultural sciences. I don't know why but
I found it interesting. Like I was asked to speak at an OBGYN conference when I published something on leukemia and the use of arsenic, and those two don't really mesh.
So I mentioned this, but yeah, so Kevin, we've had a number of questions in the chat about your plans in the future for making the tool publicly available. And you mentioned this a little bit in your talk, but I'm wondering if you could just sort of talk about that a little bit more and how that's been and why you want to have it be available outside of MSK.
Sure. Jacob, chime in too if there's anything I'm missing here. Right now, things are just up in the air in terms of what direction it will take. And I think we need to talk to some folks within MSK to understand what might make the most sense. But we, the thing that we think is a real potential opportunity is that this is not something that would just be beneficial for folks working within MSK. We see how this could be beneficial for a much broader audience. And so for that reason alone, it's a reason why, it would be great if it's possible to make it more publicly available. But right now, unfortunately, I'm honestly not sure what's going to happen there.
I think just to chime in, I think this is sort of I guess the other side of institutions like ours. Kevin's from a department that's within the sort of IT infrastructure. I'm from a clinical department, but I also sort of have a research hat. And so the question is, where is this exactly going to sit? So, we would absolutely love to release it. We would love to have a sort of an ongoing commitment to maintaining it, both from ourselves and from, from others. And we'd like to kind of organize that properly before letting this out to make sure that it does grow and flourish. And some of the questions that people have asked, like, are there legal ramifications to labeling journal articles? I'm sure there are. I'm not the one to answer that question though, and so we sort of have to make sure that something that's coming from us and something that at least has the label of the institution on it is presented in the right way. So we will be working on it, but both of us are very motivated to get this out and into the hands of other people at other institutions and sort of see what people do with it. And we'd love to have that happen.
That's great to hear.
We would love to hear from folks too, whoever that might be, about your interest, because that could help us further explain how this might be useful to a population outside of MSK.
I just
helps Sarah with like positive feedback.
And I want to just throw in that the Ottawa team has been quietly working on a similar kind of thing. So it would be awesome if you could reach out to them. So far, it's been very quiet.
I think we have time for one more question. I think John or Monica, this might be something you could speak to, so that librarians can make better informed collection development decisions. Is anyone aware of whether database vendors disclose how they are vetting to identify and extract predatory or problematic journals, a situation that's likely to be exacerbated with AI, ChatGPT, etc.?
I think John is in a better position to begin to answer this one.
Not really. Yeah, we don't have any databases we maintain. I mean, I have seen just looking at some other providers, it's always incredibly vague statements. It's nothing like what we're talking about here, where everybody's going through these like epic lists of like, oh, we're doing all this like complicated stuff. They're like, well, we look for journal validity and we include them. I haven't seen a lot of like really, or it's just a single thing. As long as it's indexed in Scopus, which is probably fine. I think it's a much more simplistic kind of view that versus the sophistication everybody's talking about here. That's what I've seen.
Thanks so much, John. We are at time, so we're going to end the webinar now. I want to thank all our speakers so much for your really thoughtful and critical presentations. Please complete our survey. It'll pop up directly when the webinar ends, and everyone have a great afternoon.
I just want to take one moment to thank the audience for their engagement.
Yes, absolutely.
I think this is our first time in all our advancing authorship events that we've had so much engagement from the audience. So thank you for attending, and thank you for sharing your thoughts as well.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.